Welcome to the recorded training for the import process section of SLEIS. To begin, click the login link in the upper right corner of the SLEIS welcome screen. Then log into SLEIS using your SLEIS user account credentials. You'll be brought to the My Facility screen. Some SLEIS user accounts may be linked to one facility, while other SLEIS user accounts may be linked to multiple facilities. To import data into SLEIS for your facility, click the Open button on the right side of the screen under the Actions heading. You will then be brought to the My Reports screen. To import data for the emissions year that you are interested in, click the Open button on the right side of the screen under the Actions heading. You'll then be taken to the emissions year that you are wanting to import data for. To begin, first update your facility inventory data. All equipment that you wish to include in your download template or to import data for, it must first exist in the facility inventory portion of SLEIS. If you try to download the template and then enter an emission unit ID or a release point ID or a unit process, the import will fail when it comes to the validation portion of the process. So be sure that your facility inventory is up to date before you try to import emissions data back into SLEIS. Once you have your facility inventory up to date, click the Download Template button. You are then able to open a zip file that contains 3 CSV files. The first file is called the Reference Data Values file. This file contains codes and descriptions for those codes that you need to use when importing your processes and your process emissions file. If you do not use the codes in column B, you will experience errors during the validation portion of the import process. The second file that's included is the Processes file. This Processes file lists the emission unit and the process identifiers that have a status of operating in the facility inventory. If you have emission units and related unit processes in the facility inventory that are permanently shut down or temporarily shut down, they will not be included in this download file. Processes file is where you report your throughput, throughput units of measure, throughput type, throughput material, as well as your hours of operation, average hours per day, days per week, and weeks per year. And finally, your meteorological season percent operations for the whole year. You'll notice that some columns are blank and do not need to be included in the import process. Those columns are columns G through R, as well as columns AA through AH. Any emission unit ID or process ID that is included or download template must have all other required fields entered in order to pass the validation process. For additional help on data entering the process file, please contact DNR staff. The third file that's part of the import process is the process emissions file. Again, you will notice only emission unit IDs and process IDs that were in the facility inventory as having a status of operating will be included in this file. Here is where you will report the pollutants that are being emitted, the calculation method, which formerly was known as the emission factor source in SPARS, as well as your emission factor unit of measure, and the total emissions estimate for that pollutant on a process basis. Values in column G are your emissions estimates in terms of tons. For additional help with the process emissions data entry import file, please contact DNR staff. Once you have saved your work on the processes and process emissions file, you are then ready to import that data. To do so, click the Import Data button. You'll then be taken to a screen where you can attach both the process file as well as the process emissions file. You'll notice that the Continue button, in order to move to the next step, will not be enabled until you attach both files. Once you attach both files, a validation process will run, and it will do a check on both your process and process emissions files to make sure all the correct codes that were used using the reference data values file in the zip folder from the download template. If you have a list of errors, a CSV will be available for you to download to view those errors. The CSV will tell you exactly which emission unit ID, which process ID contain the error, and it will tell you exactly which lines in your process and process emissions files that contain the error. For help validating your import file, please contact DNR staff. That concludes the recorded training for the import process section of SLEIS.